It's a topic that both inside and outside the chamber we both spend a lot of time on, which is diversity and inclusion. And, you know, again, I will quote my dear friend Tanya Allen, who talks about it being deliberate and intentional. Right. So I'm looking forward to what the panel is going to discuss.
Right. And this is just so important, many people need to realize, to our economic future.
Absolutely.
It's about diversity, but it's also about our economy.
It's a business imperative.
It definitely is. So we're going to give it to you, Nancy Kafer.
Maybe we'll go with you and you. Hi. Well, welcome to our panel this morning on diversity and economic inclusion. Here with me is Anika Goss, the Executive Director of Detroit Future City, and Leslie Murphy, President and CEO of Murphy Consulting Incorporated. So our panel is called Diversity and Economic Inclusion, a Business Imperative. And I think we would all agree that it should be a business imperative, but is it really a business imperative at this point in our culture?
Right. I think that's a really good question. And off camera, you would ask me, is it a business imperative? And I was like, oh yeah. And you're like, no, maybe not. And I think you're right, Nancy, that we haven't gotten there yet. And I think what's really important is that right now, paying attention to intentionality and paying attention to how we can quantify that business imperative, to actually be able to say it's not just the rhetoric around this, but that if all of Detroit, if all of southeastern Michigan can't win from new economy, from new growth, and we can't have an inclusive process, then none of us will win. And I think that that's really clear. And that begins to actually address why we need to make sure that this is, in fact, a business imperative.
Leslie?
Yeah, so my perspective is a little different. I spend most of my time in a boardroom for large public companies, and I will tell you that we are taking it very seriously. The war for talent has completely changed the way organizations think. Between that and the huge transition that's going on in every business with the technological rise and so forth. And it's forcing everybody to come back and say, how can we be successful? We can only do that with our people.
That's great.
And the talent quotient. And there is increasing recognition that unless we have diverse teams that have figured out how to not just hire with diversity, but to actually build an inclusive culture, no one's going to win.
Mm-hmm. So when you're in those rooms, what do, given that if this is an accepted goal or a stated goal, what do the conversations, the intentionality around getting to that goal sound like?
Well, actually, we're all spending much more time with HR portions of the organization, but as we also speak with the business leads, that's also where they're spending a lot of time. And our conversation is around, how are you approaching it? Mm-hmm. How will we know if we're building inclusive cultures? And so we're seeing a lot more about active surveying, active retention statistics, and also looking at the makeup of the workforce. We have an oversight role, and we take it seriously, and management's taking it very seriously.
That's really good to hear, and I think we're probably at the beginning of that process, because it also then, hopefully the next phase of that will really begin to address some of the really deep-rooted structural inequities around promotion and workforce outcomes and wage increases, where we really see some of these really stark inequities, procurement. And those are the really key issues that really keep us from, so even if you are saying, okay, we need to make sure that 40% of our workforce are either Detroiters or African American or Latino or women, and we're still not really opening up the door for minority procurement, for low-income businesses to be able to grow and participate as a result of new businesses coming into Detroit, then we haven't really made that ground that we really need in order to grow Southeast Michigan.
Right.
We're early, I'll
Yeah,
give you that one.
yeah.
But that's where it starts with, right, is intentionality and discussion
Yes.
and oversight. And I do think there is heightened awareness around the issue.
But then there's the other piece I think you mentioned is, let's say if you have a goal of having 40% of your workforce become whatever diversity
Yeah.
that you're hoping for, getting employees in the door is one thing, but then how do you ensure that those employees have a track to leadership, that they have a track to
That's right.
pay increases? Can you maybe, Leslie, talk about what you're seeing in boardrooms when you talk about how to structure not just getting through the door, but success and leadership roles and guidance of the company?
Yeah, and I've done a lot of work around this as well in a consulting role, but as we sit in the boardroom and talk about it, what we're interested in is certainly what the overall statistics are, and there's no question we're doing a lot better job at hiring than we are at bringing them through the ranks, right? That's been a historical challenge for any underrepresented group. But there are increasing best practices that have been identified with sponsorships and the right mentors at the right time, the right training, the right like I call them gates. So you don't make a promotion unless you have considered a diverse candidate class. There's a number of best practices emerging, and our job as oversight is what are those, and then how well are they working. But we have a long way to go to realize the benefits of those. But it's a good start.
Yeah.
So, I mean, everybody's probably familiar with that study that looked at resumes submitted with white or non-white sounding names and how folks responded differently. But I saw a recent study or article in Harvard Business Review that talked about how this unconscious bias manifests for resumes. But even in companies that say in their job postings that they prize that they're looking for diverse candidates, that unconscious bias still manifests, and so the candidate kind of gets it's sort of a double blow for the candidate because they've been open about maybe their background. They may have been more guarded if they were not welcomed as a diverse candidate, but then they're still getting hit with the bias. How much do you talk about unconscious bias in these boardrooms and how to get that out of the HR practice?
Yeah, it is a subject that gets discussed at a high level. What practices are you adopting? Or I'm on a board where they are actually adopting blind interviews. You know, a lot of interviews are being done by Skype, at least initial interviews, and increasingly they're actually on a Skype machine that's black, that's just a blank screen because. What they don't want to bring that bias into that interview. They don't have a name and they don't have a visual. And again, there's a lot of things that are being tried, but we all come into things with unconscious bias. And there's a lot of training going on. There's a lot of awareness around it. Won't tell you that we're there because I mean all you have to do is look at the highest corporate ranks, and that we're not minorities and women are not equally represented. They just aren't.
And I think when we've looked at the numbers as well, when you begin to, really look at who's being hired and where they're living, and then wage increases as well. I think some of this, you talked a little bit about the overall data and statistics has to be incorporated into that. And so I think when we look at some of these statistics that the majority of employers for all of these new jobs that have come into Detroit are from people who are living outside of the city, we're not necessarily, I think as companies, they have to be able to say, well, then that's me too, right? Like that they're a part of that. I think it's very easy for a company to say, well, not us, because we hired Joe, and Joe lives on the east side. So it's all of the companies that are a part of that are in Detroit need to actually look both at the data and some of these intentional hiring practices as well in order to really change the trajectory on that.
Intentionality seems to be the
Yeah.
word of the conference this
Yes.
year, and I hope that it's
And I'm
something
excited.
people really think about, because things don't just fall into line unless you pay that close attention to them and you're conscious of what you're doing, and that's the best way to work on unconscious bias too, right? Is to try to detect it within yourself, because we all, as you said, we all have this. But one of the things you talked about the sort of homogeny of still the higher echelons of corporate leadership, and it's not just overwhelmingly white, it's still overwhelmingly male. There aren't that many female CEOs, and I wonder, we're starting to talk a little bit more about talking about family-friendly workplace practices, which of course, with all due respect to dads who are doing the heavy lifting, mostly it's women who are doing disproportionately childcare and child rearing, elder care, and all these things. What are things we need to be thinking about as we try to diversify racially and ethnically and by gender as well? What are I know that we're both moms. I don't know if you've had the same. Let me delve into your personal life. But, so I know that we've probably all encountered this
Yeah.
Disproportionate burden.
yeah. So
Meetings at 8 o'clock that you can't get to because you've got to take a kid to school.
Well, and I
Anyway.
think that's one of the quickest ways when a workplace says it's family friendly, one of the quickest ways to find out whether it means that is what time do you expect employees to be
Yeah.
here? Because if you had to take a kid to school at 8, you can't be at work at 7:30 or 8. So what are other things that that we need to be considering to make sure that we keep mothers in the workplace and not dropping out and destabilizing economically their families or their children's lives?
Yeah, I think what we have to do is give voice to the workers. And I think it's a really important inclusive practice in every workplace for all issues, right? But we need to be able to be okay with saying, I can't make an 8 o'clock meeting, can we do it at 9? I mean, I remember consulting my calendar as if I needed to consult it. Well, I can't be there at 7:30, let's make it 8:15 or
Yeah.
8:30, right? But you did it behind the cloak. Well, nowadays we're just hearing about the needs, right? It's now in vogue for the dads to leave to go coach soccer or basketball, and so we're starting to see that openness. But I think we need to develop our own confidence and voice that says, I can be here, but I can't be here until then.
I also think that there's, for me, if you step back from it a little bit, I have a really small nonprofit, and we deal with this in my own organization. We have a really small nonprofit of 12 people, and we had 4 babies in a year and a half, and so we had to, it was more than just how can I make my young women leaders feel valued in the company, you know what I mean, and make sure that we had sort of diverse practices that valued mothers. But as a business practice, I want the best talent in the organization, and so I really want to attract talent whether or not you're having a baby. And so if you're having a baby but you're the expert in your field, I'm going to make it really easy for you to go and have the baby, for you to do whatever you need to do and bring your baby to whatever it takes, because I want you to come and still be a part of my company. And so it's a different, it's not just accommodating women.
No.
It's actually really attracting talent and maintaining
And
talent.
that's an important way to flip that conversation.
Yeah.
You're not helping someone out. You're ensuring that your organization continues to retain the best talent.
That's right.
And that probably rings true at every part of this conversation when we're looking at, you're not doing a favor to diverse candidates by hiring them. You're making sure that you're getting the best possible people to bring value to your business.
Exactly.
And in this day and age, talent is where success lies for companies.
Exactly.
And it is the conversation of the year, of the day, and it's going to be for the foreseeable future, right? And so it is all about that. We also understand a lot better the cost of turnover, the cost of acquiring new employees, and bringing them up to speed. And as that knowledge base has grown, I think we've all gotten much more aware of these are our assets, and this is the most important thing to our success.
Well, we are almost out of time here, but one takeaway from each of you for the folks who have been kind enough to follow along here about what they need to keep in mind as they go forward in their business to ensure that they're getting to that goal of diversity and economic inclusion?
Yeah, I really want to go back to this idea of connecting minority procurement and workforce outcomes as part of a economic ecosystem, right? That we need to really think about, this has to be more than just hiring, hiring a certain number of minorities to be able to meet a quota. We need to really think about how are we contributing and growing our full economic ecosystem with diverse procurement as well as workforce outcomes.
Leslie, the last word is yours.
Yeah, so my last word would be, yes, I think we need to think about diversity in everything we do and make sure that we have diverse participation in every conversation. But more importantly, once we get a diverse population, we need to figure out how to build an inclusive culture that really values the differences and the benefits that diversity can bring to more success for the entity.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks everyone who's been watching.
Thank
Great,
you.
Thank you.